Come in and settle yourself down, and let the day you have been carrying come quietly to rest. There is nothing left tonight that needs doing, nothing that cannot wait until the light comes back, so you can loosen your hold on all of it now, one small thing at a time, the way you might set down a heavy basket at the end of a long walk and feel your shoulders rise. Make the space around you soft and warm. Pull the blanket a little higher if you like, let your head sink into the pillow, and let your eyes close whenever they wish to, because from here on you do not need them. You only need to listen, and even the listening can grow loose and drifting as we go. Tonight we are going to travel a very long way back, thousands of years back, farther than most stories ever reach, to a green and dripping rainforest in the warm middle of the world we now call Central America, and there we are going to follow the whole long story of a people called the Maya, from the very first families who cleared a patch of jungle to plant their corn, all the way through their shining cities and their strange and beautiful calendar, to the day the great cities were quietly given back to the trees. This is the entire story of the ancient Maya, and it is told for sleep. That is the important thing to understand before we begin. Nothing here will startle you. Nothing will leap out of the dark. There will be kings, and there will be great stone temples, and there will be the rise and fall of whole cities. But all of it will come to you gently, rising and fading as softly as the rains that come in their season, and then quietly go, as softly as the wet season gives way to the dry, and the dry gives way to the wet again, turning and turning without alarm. And if you drift off before the end, that is not a failure. That is the whole point of this. The story will keep. It will wait for you as patiently as the jungle has waited for everything else. You can come back another night and find the part you missed still here, exactly where you left it, unhurried, unspoiled, waiting in the green. So there is nothing to hold on to, and nothing to stay awake for. Let us just breathe, once slowly before we go. Breathe in, softly, and let it out, slower still, and again if you like, in through the quiet, and out, letting your whole body grow a little heavier as the breath leaves you. One more, gentle and unhurried, and on the way out let your jaw unclench, let your hands go loose, let the small weight of the day slide off you entirely. Good now, let us begin where the Maya themselves would want us to begin, which is not with a king, and not with a temple, and not with a golden throne, but with the land, because the land came first, and the land shaped everything else. So picture, if you will, a vast flat country lying under a sky heavy with warmth. It is a great low shelf of pale stone, limestone, soft and porous, stretching for hundreds of miles. The bones of an ancient seabed lifted up long ago and left to bake under a tropical sun. And over almost all of it lies the forest, the rainforest, thick and green and endless, so that if you could rise up above it like a bird, you would see nothing but a rolling, unbroken ocean of treetops, deep green swelling into deeper green, all the way to the far hazy edges of the world. This is a land of trees, enormous trees, tall ceiba trees, the greatest of them, the ones the Maya would come to hold sacred, rising straight and grey out of the tangle, with their branches spread wide near the top, like a green roof held up over everything, so high that whole worlds of birds and vines and small creatures live up in their crowns and never once come down to the ground. And beneath that high canopy the light goes soft and green and dim, filtered down through layer upon layer of leaves, so that the forest floor is always in a kind of gentle underwater twilight, warm and moist and still. Rest there a moment, in that green dimness, and let your own thoughts grow that soft. Now listen to it, because a rainforest is never truly silent. There is a low, steady hum that never stops, the sound of 1,000,000 insects soaring away in the heat, a sound so constant you soon stop hearing it, and it becomes the very texture of the quiet. There is the drip of water off leaves long after the rain has passed, a slow tapping in the green. There are the birds, the flash of a scarlet macaw crossing an open patch of sky like a bright thrown thing, the whistles and chatters of 100 kinds you cannot see. And there is one sound above all that carries through this forest, deep and rolling and strange, a great low roar that swells up out of the trees at dawn and at dusk, and rolls across the canopy for miles. The call of the howler monkeys, sitting high in the branches and letting loose a sound so vast you would think it came from some enormous beast, when in truth it comes from a creature no bigger than a small dog, calling out to the other troops across the green, "Here we are, here is our forest, here we are." And somewhere below, unseen, moving through the shadows on padded feet, is the jaguar, the great spotted cat, the lord of this forest, sliding silent through the underbrush, the one the Maya would come to fear and to honour above all other animals, the creature of the night and of the shadowed places, whose spotted coat they thought was the starry night sky itself made into flesh. Hold that picture gently as you drift. The green dim world, the towering trees, the roar of the monkeys rolling across the canopy, the silent cat below. That is the stage. That is the land onto which our whole story will be set. But now I must tell you the strange and crucial thing about this land. The thing that made the Maya who they were. And it is this. For all that water pours from the sky here, this is a land with no great river running through its heart. When we told, on another night, the long story of Egypt, everything turned upon the river, the Nile. That broad and generous flood sliding through the desert, rising every year to spread its dark, rich mud across the fields. A single silver thread of life drawn straight through the sand, so that all you had to do to understand Egypt was to understand the river. Here there is no such thread. Here, across much of this flat limestone country, the water does not run in a river you can see and follow and trust. Here the water hides. Because the stone underfoot is soft and full of holes, the rain that falls, and though it falls in torrents in its season, does not gather into rivers and roll to the sea, it sinks. It vanishes straight down through the porous stone and slips away underground, into hidden channels and dark unseen rivers deep below your feet, leaving the surface. For months at a time, dry so water, which was everywhere in Egypt, is the great precious secret of the Maya world, the thing that had to be found and kept and prayed for, and everything, turned upon the rain. There are 2 seasons here, only 2, and they are the great breathing of the year. There is the wet season, when the clouds pile up dark and towering in the afternoons, and the rain comes down in warm grey sheets, drumming on the canopy, running in silver ropes off every leaf, filling the low places, greening the whole world, waking the corn in the fields. And there is the dry season, when the rains cease and the sky clears and hardens, and month by month the land grows thirsty. The forest a little browner, the low pools shrinking, the people watching the sky and waiting, because everything they had, all of it, depended on whether the rains came back when they were supposed to, full and steady and on time. When the rains came well, there was corn, and there was life, and there was plenty. When the rains came weak, or came late, or failed, there was hunger, and fear, and prayer. So you can already feel, can you not, how deep the rain went into these people, how it became the tide of their whole existence, the thing they honoured and feared and begged for above all, the great uncertain heartbeat of the Maya year. And in a land where the surface water hid and vanished, there was one kind of place where the hidden water opened, at last, to the sky, and these places the Maya held more sacred than almost anything else. Here and there across the flat forest, the soft limestone roof over one of those deep underground rivers would collapse and fall in, leaving a great round shaft, a natural well, a pit open to the daylight, and at the bottom of it, dark and still and cool, lay water, clear and deep, a doorway down into the hidden rivers of the underground. The Maya called such a place, in their language, by a word we have shortened to cenote, and if that word is strange to you, do not trouble over it. Simply picture the thing itself, a great round pool of still dark water sunk down in the pale stone, ringed with hanging vines and dripping ferns, the sunlight falling straight down into it from far above, so the water glows a deep and secret blue. Green in the shadowed shaft. In much of this land, especially in the flat north, these cenotes were the only reliable water there was, and so villages and later whole cities grew up around them, drawn to the open eyes of the hidden rivers the way, elsewhere, people gathered along a shore. But the cenotes were more than wells to the Maya. They were sacred. Looking down into that still dark water, ringed with stone, sunk deep below the living green, they felt they were looking into the mouth of the other world, the watery underworld beneath everything. And they came to these pools to pray, to make offerings, to speak to the gods of rain and of the deep. So carry that image gently down with you as you sink towards sleep, the round still pool in the pale rock, the light falling into it from far above, the dark cool water that was both the only drink for miles and a doorway into the world below. It is a good and quiet thing to hold. Now into this green and dripping world, over ages so long they blur into one another, came people. At first they came only as wanderers, small bands of families moving through the forest, as human beings had moved for uncountable generations, taking what the land offered as the seasons turned, gathering the wild fruits and the nuts and the roots, following the deer and the peccary and the great slow tapir through the trees, fishing the coasts and the pools. Knowing the forest the way you know an old friend's face, but building nothing that lasted, planting nothing, moving always on. And this went on for a very long time, longer than we can easily feel, generation after quiet generation, the forest giving and the people taking and moving on, and it might have gone on so forever, except that slowly. So slowly no single person could ever have seen it happening. These people learned to do a new thing. They learned to plant. And of all the things they learned to plant, one mattered more than all the rest together. One plant that would become the very centre of Maya life, the food, the wealth, the substance of the body, and in time the sacred stuff of the god's own story. That plant was maize. Cornell wild maize did not begin as the tall, generous plant we know. It began, far to the north and west, as a thin, scraggly grass with a tiny, hard head of seeds, barely worth the gathering, and the great, slow, patient miracle of those early farmers, working with it for thousands of years, choosing the best seeds from the best plants, saving them, planting them, choosing again, was to coax that poor wild grass, little by little, over an unimaginable span of time, into corn, into the tall green stalk heavy, with a fat cob of soft sweet kernels that could feed a family and be dried and stored and carried and counted on. And once a people has corn, everything changes. Because now you do not have to wander. Now you can stay. Now you can clear a patch of the forest and make it yours, and feed yourself from that one small piece of ground, and the whole shape of human life bends around that single fact. So picture, now, the very first Maya farmers standing at the edge of that endless green, and understand the work they set themselves. To plant, they first had to make a clearing, and to make a clearing in a rainforest is no small thing. They would choose a patch of the forest, cut down the smaller trees and the tangle of undergrowth with their stone axes, let it dry through the last of the dry season, and then, carefully, set it alight, so that the cut brush burned away and left the ground open to the sky and dusted with pale ash that fed the soil. This burned and planted clearing they called, and their descendants still call, the milpa, the cornfield, and if that word too is new to you, let it settle softly. It simply means the patch of forest cleared and burned and given over to corn. And they did not plant the corn alone. This is one of the small quiet wisdoms of these people, worth resting on for a moment. Into the same milpa, among the tall corn, they planted beans, which climbed up the corn stalks as if the corn had grown on purpose to hold them. And they planted squash, whose broad low leaves spread across the ground between, and kept the weeds down and the soil damp. And they planted chili peppers for the fire and the savour of it. corn and beans and squash and chili growing all together in the one field, each helping the others, the corn giving the beans a ladder, the beans feeding the soil, the squash shading the ground, so that the milpa was not a bare field of one crop, but a small living garden, a little green household of plants leaning on one another, and from it a family could draw very nearly everything it needed to live. Rest on that a while, the picture of that first cleared and burning field, the ash settling, and then the green shoots rising, and then the corn standing tall and heavy and gold-green in the sun, where a wall of jungle had been. And once people could stay, they stayed. They built houses, simple and good and well-suited to that warm, wet world, houses of poles set upright in the ground with walls woven between them and packed with mud, and over the top a steep roof of palm thatch to throw off the rains, a roof that hung low and cool and dark and dry inside while the water drummed down outside. Small houses, gathered a few together, a family and its kin, around the milpa and near, if they were fortunate, one of those precious cenotes or some low place that held the water. And in these first small villages the other slow arts of a settled life began to grow. They learned to make pots, to shape the good clay of the river banks and the lowlands into bowls and jars, and to fire them hard, so they could store the dried corn against the hungry weeks, and cook and carry water, and the making of those pots is one of the ways we can trace them down the centuries, for the broken pieces last in the ground when everything else has rotted back into the grain. So there they are, the first Maya, no longer wanderers but villagers, living in their thatched houses around their cornfields, making their pots, watching their sky, waiting on their rains, settling year by year into the deep slow rhythm that would carry their whole civilization, the rhythm of the burning and the planting and the growing and the harvest, turning over and over with the wet and the dry, the same round of days their descendants would keep for thousands of years and, in the remote highland villages, keep even now. Now the Maya did not do all of this entirely alone, and here I want to introduce, very gently, another people, older than the Maya, who live not far off along the low humid coast to the west, and who in the story of the Maya stand as a kind of distant elder, a forebear whose gifts the Maya would inherit and make their own. These older people we call the Olmec, and you need not hold hard to that name either. Think of them simply as the grandparents' generation of this whole world, the first great culture of these lands, who flourished long before the Maya cities rose and had already faded into legend by the time our story truly opens. The Olmec, in their steaming lowland home, were the first here to build big, to raise great mounds of earth, to carve enormous heads of stone, faces of their lords 10 feet high and more, hauled somehow across the swamps and set up to be remembered. And the Olmec, it seems, were the first here to shape many of the ideas that the Maya would take up and carry so much further. It was among these older people, or among their neighbours and their time, that the family of gods began to take their first forms, the god of rain, the god of maize, the feathered serpent who would wind his way through every later story of these lands. It was in their world that the sacred bull game first began, that strange and solemn contest played with a heavy ball of rubber in a special court, half sport and half prayer, which the Maya would inherit and play for 1,000 years. And it was among them that the first ideas of a special lordship began, the notion that certain men stood closer to the gods than others and might speak for them and lead. All of this the Maya breathed in from that older air, the way a child takes in without knowing it the ways and words of the house it grows up in. And all of it they would in time make richer and stranger and more beautiful than the Olmec had ever dreamed. So when you picture those first Maya villagers, know that they were not the beginning of everything. Behind them stood the shadowy elder people, already passing on the gods and the ball game and the first idea of kings. And now, over the long, slow centuries, in the deep time before our story's golden noon, the villages began to grow. This is the part of the story we might call the long dawn, the first flowering, the slow gathering of small things into great ones, and I will take it gently, because so much of it happened out of sight, out in the green, one generation adding a little to what the last had left. Some villages, blessed with good land and steady water and clever, forceful leaders, grew larger than their neighbours. A larger village drew more people to it, and more people meant more hands, and more hands meant that great things became possible that no single family could ever do. And so in time the Maya began to build not just houses, but temples, and this was the true turning, the moment the forest people began to raise up mountains of their own making. At first these were modest things, low platforms of packed earth and rubble, raised up above the flat ground so that a shrine could stand upon them, closer to the sky and the gods. But the Maya kept building them higher. They learned to face the packed earth with stone, and to coat it thick with lime plaster, burned from that same soft limestone that lay everywhere underfoot, a smooth, hard skin of pale plaster that they could paint. And paint they did, most often a deep and glowing red, the colour of life and of blood and of the rising sun, so that these first pyramids stood up out of the green forest, gleaming red and white in the sun, blazing against all that endless green, visible for miles, the first great human marks on that vast, soft country. Imagine coming through the forest in those far days and seeing, rising above the treetops ahead, a red and white mountain that human hands had made, and knowing that the gods were honoured there, and that a great lord ruled beneath it. And there were, by now, great lords. As the villages grew into towns and the towns raised their painted pyramids, the old Olmec idea of a special lordship ripened here into true kingship. Certain men, and it was chiefly men though not always, rose to rule these growing places. Men who claimed to stand between the people and the gods, who led the ceremonies and called for the rains, and were held to keep the whole delicate world in its proper turning. And around them gathered the beginnings of everything a kingdom needs, the priests who watched the sky, the craftsmen who worked the jade and the feathers, the traders who carried goods along the forest paths, the farmers whose corn fed it all. It did not happen quickly. Nothing in this story happens quickly. It happened over centuries, the slow patient rising of one thing upon another, so gentle you could have lived a whole long life in the middle of it and thought nothing much was changing at all. But rise it did, and I want to end this first quiet night by standing you before the most astonishing early flower of all, a city that rose out of the swampy lowland jungle in that long dawn and grew so great that it startles us even now. A city whose name is El Mirador, deep in the low forest, in a marshy basin far from anywhere we now think of. The Maya of that early age gathered themselves and built, out of that flat green swamp, one of the largest cities their whole civilization would ever raise. A sprawling city of tens of thousands of people, laced with broad raised roads of white plaster running arrow straight across the wetlands from one great cluster of temples to another, and in the heart of it they raised a pyramid so vast it strains belief, a mountain of stone and rubble and plaster rising in great stepped terraces high above the forest canopy, one of the tallest structures the Maya would ever build in all their long history, and they built it, this is the thing to hold, they built it in that far-off dawn, so long ago that when its capstone was set and its plaster painted red and the whole enormous thing blazed up out of the green swamp, the city we call Rome was not yet even a proper town, was still only a scatter of huts on a few hills by a small river across the sea, its empire and its glory still many centuries from being so much as dreamed. Stand before that a moment, in your mind as you drift, a red and white man made mountain lifting out of a green swamp under a heavy tropical sky, older than Rome, raised by the great-grandchildren of the first families who ever cleared a milpa in that forest, a first golden flowering of everything the Maya would become. And then, in time, gently, as everything in this story rises and gently fades, El Mirador too grew quiet, its people drifting away for reasons half lost to us, the forest beginning even then its long, patient work of wrapping the great pyramid in roots and vines and green silence, keeping it hidden and safe as we shall see it keep so many others. But the seed was planted now, and it would not stop growing. The land was known, the corn was sacred, the hidden water was found and honoured, The first great cities had risen, and the first kings had taken their thrones, and all the pieces lay ready. And the Maya were about to gather 2 more gifts to themselves, the 2 that would set them apart from nearly every people of the ancient world. 2 ways of catching and holding time and memory that we will come to on another night if you have not already drifted off, and even if you have. They would learn to write, to carve their words and their kings' names into standing stone, so the dead might never be forgotten. And they would learn to count the days, to measure out the turning of time in vast wheeling cycles, building a calendar so deep and strange and beautiful that it would become the very tide of their whole world. But those are stories for the deeper part of the night, and there is no hurry, none at all. For now it is enough to hold the land, the green forest under its heavy sky, the hidden water in the still dark pools, the sacred corn rising gold in the burned clearings, the first red pyramids blazing out of the trees. Let all of it grow soft and far away now, the way the forest itself softens and vanishes into the green dimness a little way off. There is nothing more you need to do tonight. The rains will come in their season, the corn will rise, the cities will keep. Just rest here, in the warm green quiet, and let yourself drift on down gently. The way the rain sinks softly into the pale stone and slips away into the cool, dark rivers below. And so, with the first city standing and the first kings raising their painted pyramids toward the rain, the Maya were ready to give the world 2 of the most beautiful gifts any people have ever made, and we can come to them slowly now. The way you might turn 2 smooth stones over in your hand by the fire, feeling their weight before you look closely at what is carved upon them. The first of these gifts was writing, and it did not look like the writing you know. When we think of writing, most of us picture a small handful of letters, a tidy row of the same signs used again and again, the same 26 shapes marching across a page. But the Maya writing was nothing so plain as that. It was a forest, a dense and living forest of little pictures, hundreds upon hundreds of small carved signs that scholars have come to call glyphs. And a glyph is simply that, a single sign in this picture writing, and each one was its own tiny world. Look closely, in your mind, at one carved into the pale limestone, and you might see a small face, a rounded jaw, an eye, a headdress, the profile of a god or a man peering sideways out of the stone. Look at the next, and it is the head of a monkey, or a jaguar with its ear turned back, or a bird, or a curl of water, or a hand, or a flower, or a shell. Each little sign was cut with such care that it seemed almost to breathe, and these glyphs were clever in a way that took the world a very long time to understand, because they were 2 things at once, both pictures and sounds, so that some of them stood for a whole idea, a whole word, the way a little drawing of the sun might simply mean sun, and others stood only for a sound, a single syllable, the way the pieces of a puzzle fit together to build up a longer word out of small spoken parts. The scribes who knew this art blended the 2 freely, a picture here and a sound there, stacking them and nesting them and setting them side by side, so that reading it was less like running your eye along a line, and more like admiring a wall of carved faces, each block a little bundle of meaning. And where did they set these glyphs down? They carved them into tall standing stones, upright slabs of limestone raised in the great plazas, and we can give that kind of stone its gentle name too, for it is called a stela. And a stela is only that, a tall standing stone set upright like a page turned to face the sky, often carved on its front with the figure of a king in his full finery and covered around the edges with columns of glyphs, telling who he was and what he had done. They carved them also into the wide stone steps of the temple stairways, so that to climb toward a shrine was to climb through a story written under your feet, and into the lintels the carved stone beams set above the doorways, so that to pass into a room was to pass beneath a line of words, and they painted them too, in books, real books, made of the soft inner bark of the fig tree, beaten and smoothed and coated white with lime, then folded back and forth like a screen, so that the whole long strip could open out across a table, page after painted page bright with red and blue and black. And what did they write, with all this care, in stone and in painted bark? They wrote, above all to remember, they wrote the names of their kings, and the names of the king's fathers and mothers and grandparents, the long lines of a royal family reaching back and back. They wrote the day a king was born, and the day he took his crown, and the day he raised a monument or dedicated a temple, and the day at last he died and passed beyond. They wrote of alliances made and of contests won. And underneath all of it ran one quiet longing that you already know, the same longing that moved the people who carved the names of their dead into the stone walls of the desert far away and long ago. The hope that a name, once cut deep enough into something that lasts, need never quite be lost, that a person could go on being spoken of, being known, long after the breath had left them. To write a name in Maya glyphs was to say, gently, remember this one, let this one not be forgotten. Rest on that a while. It is a very human thing, that wish, and it is written all through the jungle in stone. Now let the glyphs settle back into their walls, and let us turn the second stone over in our hand, for the second gift is the greater one, the one that beats at the very heart of this whole long story, the way the rising and falling water beat at the heart of that other tale by the great river. The Maya were keepers of time. They loved time, they studied it, they counted it with a devotion that is hard for us even to imagine, and their calendar was not one calendar but several, wheeling together, and I will unwind it for you slowly, thread by thread, so that none of it need trouble you, so that it may even soothe you, the way the ticking of a clock in another room can soothe a child toward sleep. Picture, first, two great wheels turning, meshed together like the cogs of a mill. The first wheel is a sacred count of days, a round of 260 days that turned over and over, made of 20 named days moving through 13 numbers, and this was the older, holier rhythm, the count the priests used to name the character of each day, for the Maya believed that every day had its own face, its own spirit, lucky or dangerous. A good day to plant, or a good day to marry, or a day to stay quietly at home. 260 days, turning, and beside it turned the second wheel, the wheel of the ordinary year, the year of the sun, 365 days, near enough to the year you know, the round of the wet season and the dry, of planting and of harvest. And these two wheels, the sacred count and the year of the sun, turned side by side, each at its own pace, so that any given day carried two names at once, one from each wheel, a name like a person with two names, and the pairing of the two would not come round to the very same combination again for a long, long time. For the two wheels only clicked back into their exact starting place once in about 52 years. 52 years, a whole turning of the two wheels together, and that span the Maya felt to be something like the natural length of a life, a bundle of years, a full human span gathered up and tied off and set aside. So that to live through one complete turning of the calendar was to live a full life, and the ending of that bundle and the beginning of the next was a great and solemn thing, a moment when the world was felt to be made new. Hold that gently, two wheels turning within turning, a life measured out as a single slow revolution. But the Maya did more even than this, and here we come to the thing they are most remembered for, the thing that is truly theirs, the long count. For the two turning wheels told you where you stood within the round of the years, but they did not tell you how far the whole river of time had run. They were like the face of a clock that shows the hour but not the day, and the Maya wanted the day as well, wanted to know exactly how many days had passed since the very beginning, since the mythic morning when this present world was made. And so they laid down a single long straight count, a count of all the days, one after another, reaching back to a fixed first dawn deep in the ancient past, and they built it up out of nested cycles the way you might build a great number out of ones and tens and hundreds and thousands. Only their bundles were bundles of days. A single day was the smallest bead. 20 of those days made the next bundle up. 18 of those made a bundle close to a year. Then 20 of those made a longer span, and we may give this one its gentle name, for it is called a Ketun, and a Ketun is simply a bundle of nearly 20 years, and the ending of each Ketun was a great occasion. A turning point when kings would raise a new carved stone to mark that another of these long bundles had rolled shut. And 20 Ketuns together made a still vaster span, and that great one is called a Baktun, a bundle of nearly 400 years, an age of the world, and it is the Baktun that matters most to us here. For the long count was a machine of cycles set inside cycles, days inside the 20s inside the years inside the Ketuns inside the Baktuns. Every wheel turning the next, a vast and patient counting engine that let the Maya name any single day in all of time with perfect precision, so that a scribe could carve upon a stela the exact day, told in these nested bundles, on which his king was born, and we can read that carving now and know the very day. Think of that for a moment. Softly, these people, in their thatched houses under the dripping trees, held in their minds a river of time flowing back thousands of years and forward beyond their own lives, and they counted every day of it, and they were not frightened by its vastness, they were comforted by it. And this is the tender heart of the whole matter, the thing I most want you to carry down with you into sleep, that the Maya did not see time as a line that runs out, an arrow that flies once and is spent. They saw it as turning. They saw cycles that close only in order to open again, wheels that reach their last notch only to click round to the first once more, ages that end so that new ages may begin. Every Ketun ended, and another Ketun began. Every great Baktun would one day run out its 400 years, and when it did, another Baktun would simply start, a fresh age dawning, the count rolling gently over the way a stream rolls over a smooth stone and keeps flowing. Nothing, in the Maya way of seeing, was ever truly finished. The world had been made before, and would be made again. Time was a wheel and not a cliff, and to reach the end of a cycle was not to fall off the edge of anything, but to arrive at a threshold, a doorway, a new morning. And I will say only this much now, and set it aside like a stone laid quietly by the path to be picked up again on another night, that in our own time some people heard about one of these great cycles rolling over, one Baktun ending and the next beginning, and they grew afraid, and they told a story that the Maya had foreseen the end of the world. But that was never what it meant, and the Maya themselves would have been puzzled by the fear. For to them the closing of a great cycle was exactly the opposite of an ending, was a turning over into the next dawn, and we will come back to that gently, later, and set the fear fully to rest. For now let it be enough to know that these people measured all their days against a wheel that never truly stopped, and found in that turning not dread, but comfort. The same comfort you may take from knowing that after this night there will be a morning, and after that morning another night, and so on, the wheel turning and turning. That is a gentle thing to carry into the night. Now, with writing to remember by, and the calendar to measure by, we come to the great high noon of this whole story, the long golden middle stretch that scholars call the Classic Age, the centuries when the Maya were most fully themselves, and I want you to picture the land now as it was then, from above, drifting slowly over it in the mind's eye the way a great bird might drift over the canopy, on the warm morning air. Below you, in every direction, stretches the rainforest, an unbroken rolling sea of green, and out of that green sea, here and there, rising like white islands, like the pale peaks of a range of mountains made not by the earth but by the hands of people, stand the cities. For this is the thing you must hold clearly, that the Maya were never one single kingdom, never one crown ruling from one throne over all the land, the way that other river country far away was gathered under a single lord. The Maya world was a scattering, a mosaic, dozens upon dozens of separate cities, each one its own little kingdom, each one proud and independent and fiercely itself, with its own royal family and its own patron gods and its own painted pyramids climbing above the trees, its own broad plazas paved white and blinding in the sun, its own long stone ball court where the sacred game was played, its own palaces of many rooms where the lords lived among painted walls. And over each of these cities ruled a king who was more than a king, for the Maya held their rulers to be holy, to be the living bridge between the people and the gods. And their word for such a ruler we can say softly here, the Kuhul-Ajau, which means simply the Holy Lord, the Sacred King. A Kuhul-Ajau was a man, born of a woman, who would one day die, and yet while he lived he stood at the centre of his city like the trunk of the great world tree, and it was his task to keep the gods fed and the rains coming and the calendar rightly counted, to dance in the great ceremonies dressed in the shimmering green feathers of the Quetzal bird and the skins of the jaguar, to let his own blood in offering, to raise the tall carved stones that told his deeds, and to lead his city against its rivals. For the cities were rivals, and this too is part of the golden mosaic. They made alliances and broke them. They married their daughters into one another's royal houses. They traded jade and feathers and cacao and fine painted pots along the jungle paths. And they quarrelled, and sometimes they made war, one holy lord marching against another. But we will not dwell in the blood of those quarrels, for that is not the tenor of this night. Think of them rather as the long feuds and prideful rivalries of great houses, proud families each certain of its own glory, each wanting to stand tallest above the trees. And two of those houses stood taller than all the rest, two great cities that between them shaped the whole age like two lords at either end of a long table around whom all the lesser lords must arrange themselves, and their names are Tikal and Calakmul. Let us pause and stand before Tikal, for it is worth the standing. Come down now out of the drifting bird's-eye view and set your feet in the great plaza of Tikal, deep in the rainforest of what is now northern Guatemala, and lift your eyes. All around you the jungle presses close, the ceiba trees and the strangler figs, the green dimness alive with the roar of the howler monkeys and the bright flash of macaws. And out of that jungle the people of Tikal raised temple pyramids so steep and so tall that they broke clear above the very tops of the trees, climbing into the open sky where nothing green could follow them. Picture one of them before you, a great pyramid of pale limestone rising in a series of steep terraces, so steep that the single narrow stairway climbing its face seems almost to go straight up, higher and higher, until at the very top there sits a small temple, a shrine of a few dark rooms, and rising even above that, crowning the whole, a tall ornate crest of stone that the makers built purely to make the tower taller and grander against the sky, a kind of high decorated comb of carved rock, so that the finished pyramid stood as tall as a modern building of many floors, one of the tallest things anyone in all the Americas would build for 1,000 years and more. Stand at its foot and tip your head back, and follow that stair up and up until it makes you dizzy. And then imagine climbing it in the cool of the early morning, hand and foot, the stone still damp, the mist still lying in the plaza below, until you come out at the top into the first sunlight and turn around. And there below and all around you is the endless green ocean of the forest, and rising out of it, near and far, the pale crests of the other great pyramids of Tikal, catching the light, floating like the masts of ships above the trees. That is what a Maya king climbed toward. That is where he stood to be closest to his gods. Hold that picture as you drift. The white stone floating on the green sea, the mist in the plaza, the monkeys calling in the dark below. And far away to the north of Tikal, across a great stretch of unbroken jungle, in what is now the deep forest of southern Mexico, rose its long rival, the other great house, Calakmul, a city just as proud and in its day just as mighty, with its own huge pyramids and its own line of holy lords who called themselves by the sign of the Snake Kings. And for the better part of 2 centuries these two, Tikal and Calakmul, the tall house of the south and the snake house of the north, circled one another like the 2 great wheels of the calendar itself, each drawing the smaller cities into its own circle of friendship and allegiance, each seeking to outshine and outlast the other. Sometimes one rose and the other was humbled, Sometimes the wheel turned and the humbled one rose again, and this long, slow, back-and-forth rivalry, more like the rivalry of two ancient families than any quick and bloody war, gave the whole classic age its shape, its tides, its rising and falling fortunes, city allied to city and lord wedded to lord across the green miles, all of it patiently recorded on the standing stones, so that we may read today, faintly, who triumphed and who yielded, and when. Let it turn softly in your mind two great cities far apart under the same rainforest sky, each certain it was the centre of the world. And through all these cities, great and small, rival and allied, there moved another kind of person we should not leave out of the Golden Age, quieter than the kings but in their way just as remarkable, and these were the watchers of the sky. For the Maya did not only count time on the ground in their nested cycles of days, they lifted their eyes and counted it in the heavens too, and their priests were astronomers of astonishing patience and skill. Night after night, year after year, from the tops of their pyramids and from special buildings raised for the purpose, buildings with narrow windows and low doorways set to frame particular slices of the sky, they watched the wandering lights move against the fixed stars. They watched the moon most tenderly, following her from thin new crescent to full and round and back to darkness, keeping such careful count of her comings and goings that they could tell far in advance when she would darken, when the shadow would slide across her face. They could foretell the eclipses, and that is no small marvel, to sit in a thatched observatory in the jungle and know, from nothing but patient watching and patient counting, that on such and such a night the moon would go dark. And above all they loved and feared and followed one particular wandering light, the bright morning and evening star that we call Venus, which the Maya watched with special devotion, charting its long dance, the way it vanishes into the glare of the sun and then returns, first as the morning star before dawn, then away again, then back as the evening star after sunset, a great slow rhythm that takes many months to complete, and they had measured that rhythm of Venus so exactly, over so many generations of watching, that their reckoning of it was accurate almost to the day across centuries. They wrote all this into their painted bark paper books, tables of the moon and tables of Venus, so that a priest could open the folded pages and read what the sky would do. And here is the beautiful thing, the thing that gathers the whole chapter of the night together, that for the Maya the writing and the calendar and the watching of the stars were not three separate cleverness, but one single seamless understanding, all woven into the same turning cloth. The glyphs on the stela recorded the exact long count day. The long count day sat within the turning wheels of the sacred count and the solar year, and those wheels turned in step with the moon overhead and the slow dance of Venus and the march of the sun across the seasons of rain and drought below, so that when a holy lord climbed his high pyramid at dawn on a carefully chosen day to raise a new carved stone and let fall a few drops of his own blood in offering, he stood at the exact meeting point of all of it at once, of the written word and the counted day and the wheeling sky and the green rain-fed earth, the whole vast machine of Maya time and Maya heaven turning gently around that single small human figure in his Quetzal feathers on the white stone against the blue. That was the Golden Age. Dozens of cities, white on the green, a holy lord in each, born and crowned and remembered in carved stone. The two great houses of Tikal and Calakmul circling one another across the miles, the ball courts loud with the game, the priests watching the moon and the morning star, and over all of it, above all of it, quietly, endlessly, without hurry and without fear, the great calendar turning, the days rolling into their bundles and the bundles into their ages, cycle within cycle within cycle, ending only ever to begin. And so, with the cities settled into their green mosaic and the calendar wheeling slowly overhead, let us climb, without hurry, toward the very noon of this civilization, to the highest and warmest hour of its long day, and let us do it the way this channel loves best, not by counting stones or reciting the names of battles, but by sitting for a while beside one or two of the people who lived at the summit of it all, so that the Golden Age is not a fact you are asked to hold, but a person you are asked to imagine, breathing, aging, hoping, in a painted palace deep in the rainforest. Breathe out slowly, once, and let the jungle close softly around you again. We are going now to a city set among low green hills, where a clear stream comes down out of the forest. A city whose ancient name the Maya wrote with the glyph of a great bone, though we know it today by a gentler modern word, Palenque. And if you have wondered what a Maya city at its most beautiful might have looked like, this is the one to hold in your mind as you drift. Because Palenque was small as these kingdoms went, never one of the mightiest in war, but it was perhaps the loveliest of them all, its buildings lighter and finer than most, their walls not heavy and blank but pierced and delicate, roofed with high combs of carved and painted plaster, and its people were makers of the most graceful sculpture the Maya ever made. Faces modelled in stucco so tender and so lifelike that when you look upon them now, across all those centuries, you feel you are meeting someone rather than reading a record. And into this small, beautiful, water-blessed city, a little under 1400 years ago, a boy was born who would become one of the most remembered of all the god kings, and his name, when we sound out the glyphs, was Kinnick Janab Pakal, which we may gently shorten to Pakal, and which carries in it the word for the sun and the word for a shield, so that his name means something like the radiant sun shield, a fine name to carry through a long life, and long his life would be. Rest on that a while, that a child was born in a green city by a stream, and grew, and would one day be called great. Pakal came to the throne while he was still only a boy, barely 12 years old, in a time when his little kingdom had known sorrow and setback, when enemies from a stronger city had come and shaken Palenque and carried off some of its sacred things, and you might imagine that a child king in a wounded city would be a small and passing figure, quickly forgotten. But the gentle truth of Pakal is that he was given a great gift that not everyone is given, the gift of time, of years and years and years, for he would sit upon that throne, guiding his city for nearly 70 years, one of the longest reigns of any king in the whole ancient world, so that men and women were born, grew old, and died within his single reign, having known no other lord their whole lives long, and the child who inherited a shaken town would hand on at the very end a city at the height of its beauty and its confidence. Think of that span, 70 years, the better part of a long human life spent as the living heart of a kingdom, the sunshield rising and setting over Palenque decade after decade after decade, and hold that as a comfort, that sometimes the ones who begin small and wounded are given the years to grow whole and great. Under Pakal, and under the sons who followed him, Palenque was built into the jewel we still walk through today, and at the centre of it he raised a sprawling, beautiful palace, not a single grand hall, but a whole crowded corral of courtyards and galleries and shadowed rooms set upon a broad raised platform, with wide plastered courts where the light fell and narrow corridors where it pooled and cooled, its walls once bright with painted stucco. Red and blue and yellow, its piers carved with graceful figures of lords and captives and gods, and rising above all of it a curious square tower of several stories, unlike anything else the Maya built, a tower from whose top the priests and astronomers could watch the sky, and could look out, perhaps, across the whole green kingdom and the misty forested hills rolling away toward the great plain. And if you would like a single picture to fall asleep on, you might picture that, a lone slender tower rising above a painted palace above a rainforest, catching the last gold of the evening while the howler monkeys begin their deep dusk calling in the trees below. Hold that picture as you drift. But the building for which Pakal is most remembered, and the one that lets us stand once more in the channel's favourite posture, quiet and unhurried before something wonderful, is not the palace but a pyramid, and this is a pyramid built for a very particular and very human purpose. For Pakal, in the long calm evening of his reign, set his masons and sculptors to raise a temple that would be his own resting place, a house for his body and his memory, when at last the sunshield should set, and we call it today the Temple of the Inscriptions. because inside it, carved into great panels on the wall, is one of the longest single pieces of Maya writing that survives. A forest of glyphs telling of the kings of Palenque, of Pakal himself, of the gods and the deep cycles of time reaching back into myth and forward beyond his own death, his name set down so that it might be spoken and remembered long after he was gone. And here again is our old motif, the same longing you met beside the Nile, the deep human wish not to slip away nameless into the dark, but to be held in memory, to have someone, someday, say your name aloud. Let us pause now and stand before this temple in our minds, in no hurry at all. It rises in stepped tiers up the flank of a low forested hill, and at its top sits a roofed sanctuary with a high carved comb, and a broad stair climbs its face, and for more than 1,000 years men believed it was only that. A temple raised upon a solid mountain of rubble and stone, its stairs leading only up, but there was a secret in it, kept faithfully by the stone and the jungle for 12 long centuries, and it was found within living memory. When a patient archaeologist, noticing a curious slab in the floor of the temple at the summit, with a double row of holes as though it had once been meant to be lifted, pried it up and found beneath it a stairway, choked with rubble, leading not up but down into the very heart of the pyramid, and for years his workers cleared that hidden stair, step by step, deeper and deeper into the dark, until it turned and reached, far below. At the level of the plaza and even below it, a single sealed chamber, its doorway once closed with stone, and, before it, the bones of a few young people laid there long ago as companions for the journey, a sorrow we will only touch and pass gently by, and then the great triangular slab that sealed the tomb was moved, and there in the lamplight, for the first time in 1,200 years, appeared the resting place of Pakal the Great. Breathe out slowly, once, and let us look, softly, at what was found. The little chamber was almost filled by an enormous carved stone sarcophagus, a coffin cut from a single great block, its sides carved with the images of Pakal's ancestors rising as fruit-bearing trees from the earth, and over it lay a vast rectangular lid of pale limestone, and upon that lid was carved the image for which Palenque is known across the whole world, the king himself, Pakal, shown at the very instant of his death, reclining as though tipped back at the edge of the earth, and above and around him rises the great cross-shaped world tree, the sacred ceiba that the Maya believed stood at the centre of the world, with its roots in the underworld and its branches in the sky, and at the top of the tree perches a celestial bird, and below the king yawns the open mouth of the earth, so that the whole carving shows Pakal poised at the exact hinge between the worlds, sinking into death and the underworld, yet also, in the same moment, about to rise again along the trunk of the tree into the heavens, like the sun that sets in the west, only to be reborn in the east, and like the maize that is buried in the dark earth only to sprout green into the light, so that even this, even a king's tomb, is finally an image not of ending but of turning, of a cycle rolling over, of death folded gently into rebirth, which is the calm heartbeat of everything the Maya believed. And within that great coffin the old king had been laid with quiet splendour, his face covered by a mask made of hundreds of small pieces of green jade, fitted together into a serene and ageless countenance, jade being to the Maya the most precious of all substances, more precious than gold, green like new maize and like water and like the Quetzal's feathers, the colour of life itself, and his body was adorned with jade at the ears and the wrists and the fingers, and a bead of jade had been placed in his mouth, and so the sun-shield of Palenque was sealed away, remembered in stone and honoured in green, to sleep beneath his temple while the forest grew up over the plaza and the centuries turned. And that jade mask and that carved lid and that hidden stair are, more than almost anything else the Maya left us, the proof of how high and how fine this civilization had climbed by its golden noon, a confident, wealthy, artful world that could raise a mountain to hold one man's rest and fill it with beauty meant for no living eye. Rest on that awhile, the old king asleep in green jade beneath his temple, and the tree of the world carved above him. and the promise in the stone that he was not ending but only turning, like the sun, like the corn. We might, before we leave the kings, glance softly toward one or two of the other great cities of this same high noon, just to feel how wide and rich the whole green mosaic had become. For Palenque was one lovely city among many, and away to the southeast, where the lowland forest climbs toward the mountains, stood another jewel, the city we call Cotton. And if Palenque was the city of the most graceful modelling, Cotton was the city of the most magnificent carving, its sculptors working the softer local stone into figures so deep and so rounded that they seem almost a step free of the block, raising tall portrait stones of their kings crowded with ornament, and above all building a single wonder unmatched anywhere in the Maya world, a great stairway of stone climbing the face of a temple, every single one of its many risers carved solid with glyphs, thousands upon thousands of them, the longest carved inscription the ancient Americas ever produced, a whole history of a dynasty written into a staircase you could climb, so that to mount those steps was to walk up through the recorded generations of a royal house, and though much of it tumbled and jumbled over the centuries and its full story is only slowly being pieced back together, the sight of it even now, that great hieroglyphic stairway rising into the grain, is enough to make you feel the confidence and the ambition of these people at their height. And far to the north, the mighty city we already know, Tikal, whose steep temple pyramids climb above the canopy, had in this same golden age come proudly back into its strength, for it too had known a shadow, a stretch of long years when its old rival had gained the upper hand and Tikal raised no monuments and seemed to falter. And yet it did not end there either, for a determined king arose who set the city on its feet again, threw off the shadow, and led Tikal back into greatness, raising the tallest of all its towering temples in the years that followed, so that here once more the story refuses to be a simple fool, and instead becomes what this whole civilization was, a turning, a setting, and a rising, a cycle that dips low only to come round again into the light. Hold that as you drift, that even the greatest cities had their low years and their recoveries, their evenings and their dawns, and that the pattern the Maya carved into their calendars, the pattern of things ending only to begin again, was the very pattern of their own long history. Now, though, let us do the gentlest and most welcome thing of all, let us set the kings aside. We have stood before enough tombs and temples and towers for one night, and the god-kings, for all their jade and their glyphs, were only ever a very few, a scattering of lords upon the high places, while all around and below them, filling the forest with the smoke of 1,000 cooking fires, lived the great uncounted many, the ordinary Maya, the farmers and mothers and children and traders and potters, and it is among them, in the warm smoke of an ordinary morning, that we will spend the softest part of the night. So let the palaces fade back into the trees, and let us walk together, quietly, through a single ordinary Maya day. It begins, as everything here begins, in the dark before the dawn, in a small house of poles and thatch on the edge of a village, and here a farmer stirs on his mat, for he must be out and walking while it is still cool, and he rises without waking the children, and steps out under the last stars into the heavy jungle dark. And he takes the path he has walked 10,000 times, out to his milpa, his cleared field of corn, which may be near or may be an hour's walk into the forest, and as the sky greys and greens behind the black trees he comes to his field, and there before him in the growing light stand the tall green ranks of the maize, the sacred grain, the whole meaning and labour of his life, and around and between the cornstalks twine the beans climbing up them, and sprawl the broad. Leaves of the squash shading the soil, the three planted together as they have always been planted, helping one another grow, and he moves down the rows in the cool of the early day, weeding, propping, watching for the pests and the weeds, and above all watching the sky. For everything, depends on the rains coming when they should, and so his eyes go often to the clouds, and his prayers go often to the rain god. And this is the endless patient round of his life, the same round his father walked and his father's father, the clearing and the burning and the planting and the weeding and the waiting and the harvest, year upon year, the long green heartbeat of the Maya world. Rest a moment in that field with him, in the cool green morning among the tall corn, with the mist lifting off the forest and the first birds waking, and feel how old and how steady this rhythm is. And back in the little house the day has begun too, for the woman of the household is already awake, and she is the mistress of everything within these walls and this yard, and her first work, as it is her work every single day of her life, is the corn. For last night's maize has been left to soak and soften in water mixed with white lime, and now she takes it to the grinding stone. The broad slanted stone worn smooth by her mother and her grandmother, and she kneels to it and takes the smooth handstone and begins to grind, back and forth, crushing the soft kernels into a moist dough. And this grinding is the sound of every Maya dawn, the patient stone-on-stone whisper coming from every house in the village as the women make, from the sacred grain, the food of the day, and when the dough is ready, she pats it between her palms into thin flat rounds and lays them on the hot clay griddle over the hearth fire, and the smell of toasting maize rises into the morning, and there will be tortillas, and there will be tamales, the dough wrapped around beans or meat or nothing at all and steamed in leaves. And there will be a warm gruel of maize to drink, for maize is not one food here but 100 foods, the beginning and the middle and the end of nearly every meal, eaten with beans and squash and fiery chilies and now and then a little turkey or a fish, or the meat of a forest deer, and the woman tends all of this, and tends the fire, and tends the small children underfoot and the turkeys pecking, in the yard and the little garden of herbs and peppers and fruit trees beside the house. And she is weaver too, spinning cotton into thread and weaving it on a simple loom tied to a tree and to her own waist, making the cloth that will clothe them all, so that the household turns upon her hands from before dawn to after dark, and she is its steady sun. Hold that picture, the woman kneeling to the grinding stone in the firelight while the tortillas toast and the children stir. In a small house at the edge of the great forest, 1,000 years ago, and yet so like a morning anywhere, in any time, that you could almost step into it. Later, when the food is made and the sun climbs, the village stirs into fuller life, and if it is a market day the paths fill with people carrying their goods to the open market ground, and here is a place to wander slowly, for the Maya market was a bright and crowded and marvellous thing, spread out under the sun and under shade cloths, humming with talk and barter, and though the Maya had no coins of metal, they had their money, and their money was chocolate, or rather the small dark cacao beans from which chocolate is made, so precious that they were counted out and traded for everything. A certain number of beans for a rabbit, a few for a fresh tortilla, more for a length of fine cloth, and precious enough that people were even known to counterfeit them, so that in the Maya world money quite literally grew on trees and could, at the end of the day, be ground and frothed and drunk. For cacao was also the sacred and beloved drink, ground with water and chili and other flavours, and poured back and forth from vessel to vessel to raise a thick brown foam, a bitter, rich, invigorating drink reserved for feasts and for lords and for the gods. The very word chocolate coming to us, in the end, from these people and their sacred bean. And all through the market lay the wealth of the forest and the wider world spread out to trade, bright bundles of cotton cloth, blocks of precious salt from the coast, gleaming blades and points of black volcanic glass called obsidian, sharper than any metal, glowing green and scarlet feathers of the quetzal and the macaw for the headdresses of the lords. Jars of golden honey from the little stingless bees the Maya kept, jade beads, pottery painted with gods and glyphs, dried fish, fruit, tobacco, all of it changing hands in the warm hum of the crowd, so that if you would picture a happy hour of Maya life, picture this: the bright, loud, good-natured market under the noon sun, thick with the smell of cooking and cacao and crushed herbs, a whole small world of plenty laid out beneath the edge of the green. And beyond the market, at the heart of nearly every town, lay another gathering place, and this one was set into the earth, a long narrow alley of stone flanked by 2 sloping walls. The ball court, For the Maya loved, as their forebears the Olmec had loved before them, a game played with a ball of solid rubber, heavy and hard and bouncing, which the players struck and drove not with their hands or feet, but with their hips and forearms and thighs, padded with heavy protective gear, sending the heavy ball careening off the sloping walls. And it was a sport, a fast and difficult and thrilling sport that a whole town would gather to watch, cheering and wagering their cacao beans on the outcome. But it was never only a sport. For the ball game sat at the very centre of the Maya's deepest sacred story, the tale of the hero twins who went down into the underworld and played the ball against the lords of death themselves, and, through cleverness and courage, defeated them, so that to play the game was in some way to reenact that cosmic contest of life against death, of the sun's daily struggle down into the dark and up again, and so the ball court was at once a place of play and a place of holiness, part playground and part temple. And the bounce of the heavy rubber ball off the old stone was one of the familiar sounds of a Maya town, ordinary and sacred at once, like so much in this world. Rest on that a while. A town gathered in the low afternoon light around the stone court, cheering as the heavy ball flies, and knowing, even as they cheer, that they are watching the old story of the sun and the underworld played out once more. And through all of it, through the field and the hearth and the market and the court, through every single hour of the ordinary day, ran the gods, not shut away in temples for priests alone, but woven into the smallest doings of the humblest life. For the Maya lived in a world that was thick with the sacred, where the rain came from a god, and the corn was a god, and the sun was a god crossing the sky, and even the days themselves were living divine beings, so that the farmer setting out to plant would offer prayers and a little incense and perhaps a few drops of his own blood to the earth and the rain, and the woman at her hearth kept a small household shrine where offerings were made to the spirits of the home and the ancestors, and every important act, planting, building, marrying, naming a child, was fitted to the turning of the sacred calendar and blessed with the proper rites, so that to be Maya was to walk every hour in company with unseen powers, to owe the gods their due of incense and prayer and gift, and to feel oneself a small part of a vast and living and holy order of things. And near the very centre of all they believed lay a story about the corn and about themselves, the great creation story, and it is worth telling softly here as we sit among these people. For the Maya said that in the beginning the gods, alone in the still world, wished to make creatures who could speak and remember and give them praise, and they tried, and they failed. And the failing is oddly tender, for first they made beings of wet mud, but the mud people crumbled and dissolved and could not hold their shape or speak clearly, and so the gods let them wash away, and next they carved people out of wood, and the wood people walked and multiplied and filled the earth, but they were hollow, they had no hearts and no minds and no memory. They did not honour the gods, or even truly know themselves, and so that creation too was set aside, and only then, at last, did the gods find the right and sacred substance, and it was maize, the corn itself, and they took white maize and yellow maize, and ground it into meal and mixed it with water into a dough, and from that dough of ground corn they shaped the first true human beings, who could speak and think and remember and love and honour their makers. And so, in the deepest story the Maya told about themselves, people are not made of clay or of dust, but quite literally of maize, of the sacred grain, their very flesh and blood the substance of the corn, which is why the farmer in his milper and the woman at her grinding stone were not merely growing and preparing food, but tending and handling the very stuff that human beings are made of, the holy corn that is at once the meal on the griddle and the flesh on the bone, and here our old thread pulls tight and warm, the maize that opened this whole story as the grain the first farmers learned to plant, is revealed at its centre as the sacred body of humankind itself, life and food and flesh and worship, all folded into one green and golden thing. Hold that, gently, as you drift, that these people believed themselves made of corn, children of the grain, so that every field was a kind of kin, and every meal a kind of communion. And when we have walked through all of it, the dark cool field and the smoky hearth and the loud bright market, and the gathered ball court and the incense rising to the everywhere gods, and when we set it all down for the night, the thing to carry with us is the same soft thing this story keeps giving back. That these people, for all the strangeness to us of their jade-masked kings and their bark paper books and their vast wheeling calendars and their gods in every hour, wanted, at the bottom of it, exactly what we want. For the farmer walking home in the dusk wanted the rains to come and the corn to fill out fat on the stalk so that his children would not go hungry. And the woman at her fire wanted her little ones healthy, and her house warm, and her family fed. And the young ones wanted to grow and to marry and to be thought beautiful, and even that longing for beauty was tender and human. For a Maya mother might gently bind a soft board to her baby's brow to shape the sloping forehead they found lovely, and in later years a person might have their teeth carefully filed to fine points, or set with tiny discs of gleaming jade to make a smile that glittered small vanities and cares no stranger really than our own. And above all, these people wanted what we want most: to live kindly among those they loved, to feed their children and see them grow, to be remembered when they were gone, and to close their eyes at the end in the hope of waking in a good place, and that is a gentle thing to carry into the night, that across all those centuries and all that distance, the human heart under the rainforest was beating, in the end, to the same soft rhythm as your own, wanting only to love and be fed and be remembered and to wake, at last, somewhere good. And now, having sat so long and so warmly among the living mire at the height of their golden day, let us rise once more, quietly, and turn back toward the great cities and the turning of the years, for the noon of any long day must at last begin, ever so gently, to lean toward its afternoon. And so the golden mosaic of cities held its noon a long while, longer than we sometimes let ourselves believe, generation after generation of holy lords raising their stones and counting their days, until, slowly, so slowly that no one living through it would have called it an ending, the light began to lengthen and turn to afternoon over the southern jungle, and the great cities of the lowland heartland began, one by one, quietly, to fall still. It is the part of the story the world outside knows best and understands least, this fading, this thing they call the Maya collapse, and I want you to let that heavy word soften in your mind as you lie here, because it was nothing like the word makes it sound. There was no single night the sky fell, no burning, no sudden silence, nothing that would startle a sleeping listener. It was, more than anything, a settling, the way a fire that has burned bright and full through the long evening does not go out all at once, but sinks ember by ember into a low warm glow, and then into ash, without ever once alarming the room. Picture it gently, across the wide green heartland, across the jungles of the Petun and the river valleys, in city after proud city, the carving of the great standing stones simply began to slow. You remember the stelae, those tall stone trees planted in the plazas, each one recording a king's name and his birth and his victories, and the turning of the Khotun, that 20-year cycle they marked with such care. For centuries a new one had been raised, and another, the dates climbing steadily upward, the plazas filling with a forest of carved kings. And then, in one city, and then in another, and then in another, a stela was carved, and its date was set into the stone with all the old skill, and it was the last one. No one meant it to be the last. No one stood back and said, "This is the final monument, let there be no more." It was simply that the next one, the one that should have come 20 years on to mark the next turning of the cycle, was never carved at all. The plaza held its last date the way a held breath holds a moment, and then the moment passed, and the count, in that place, went quiet. City by city, over the better part of a century, in some places 2. The last dates were set and then no more, and if you laid all those final dates out on a map, you would see the silence spreading like dusk across a landscape, west and south and through the heart of the jungle, the great lights going soft one after another, not snuffed but banked, not slain but let gently down to sleep. And what became of the people, you may wonder, half drifting, and it is a fair and tender question. So let me answer it plainly and kindly, because the answer is not the grim one the word collapse would whisper to you. The people did not vanish. There were no piles of the fallen in the plazas, no city struck dead in a night. What happened was slower and more human and much less terrible than that. The great courts emptied by degrees. The painted palaces, room by room, fell quiet. The holy lords, the Kahula jaw, whose whole meaning was to stand at the centre and make the world turn, found the centre no longer holding, and one by one their lines ended or moved on, or simply faded from the record, their names uncarved, their thrones unfilled. And the ordinary people, the farmers and the weavers and the potters and the traders, the mothers grinding maize and the children underfoot, they did what people have always done when a place can no longer hold them. They gathered what they had, and they walked out into the countryside, and they went to smaller towns and to villages and to other regions where the rains were kinder and the land was fresher, and they went on living, planting the same sacred corn in new milpas, keeping the same gods, counting the same days. A great city becoming quiet is a sorrowful thing to stand before, but it is not the same as a people dying, and the Maya, remember this as you rest. The Maya did not die. They moved, as the season moves, as water moves when its old channel dries, finding the low places, finding somewhere to pool and go on. And why, you may ask, why did the old channel dry? Why did the great centre let go its hold? And here the story asks us to hold several soft truths at once. Gently, the way you might hold several small stones warm in one hand. The first, and perhaps the deepest, was the rain. You will remember from the very beginning of our night how everything in this world hung upon the rain. No great river ran through the Maya heartland to be trusted. No yearly flood came up faithfully as it did along the Nile in that other drier story. Here the water came from the sky in its season, and hid in the stone when the sky closed, and a city of many thousands lived always, whether it knew it or not, at the mercy of the clouds. And there came, we now believe, reading it in the old mud of the lakes and the slow stone of the caves, a long unravelling of dry years, seasons when the great rains came late, or came thin, or in the worst of them did not truly come at all, stretched across generations, not one bad summer which any city can weather, but drought settling in the way winter settles, and staying and returning and staying again, until the reservoirs the Maya had so cleverly carved to catch and hold the wet season water stood low and green and still, and the milpas that fed the great crowds gave less and less. Think of it as the tide of this world faltering. The great life-giving pulse that had come and gone so faithfully for so long beginning to skip. The way in that older story the flood one year did not rise, and the people looked to the water, and the water was not there. That was one strand. And woven through it were others, quieter, human ones. The land itself worked hard for so many centuries by so many hands to feed so many mouths, had in places grown thin and tired, the forest cut back farther and farther for the milpa, the soil giving less than it had given their grandparents, so that even in good years there was less margin, less to spare, less cushion against a bad one. And there was the old restlessness of the kings, for you will recall that this was never one gentle empire, but a mosaic of proud rival houses. Tikal and Calakmul and all the lesser lords ranged between them, and in the strained late years that rivalry did not soften but sharpened, city pressing against city. More of the young men called away from the fields, more of the harvest spent on the ambitions of lords, so that a world already stretched thin by the failing rain was stretched thinner still by the endless quarrels of its holy lords, each one certain the world would turn only around him, until the world, quietly, declined to turn around any of them at all. And I tell you these hard things, the drought and the tired land and the quarrelling kings, not to trouble you but so that the fading makes sense, so that it is not a mystery to keep you awake, but a thing you can understand and set down, the way you set down the day. It was not a curse. It was not a punishment. It was not the wrath of any god. It was a great and beautiful and fragile thing that had leaned, all along, on a rain that finally faltered, and when the rain faltered the whole leaning weight of it came slowly, gently down. Now here is the image I most want you to carry down into sleep, the tender heart of this whole turning, and it is the kindest part of the whole long tale. When the people had drifted away, and the plazas stood empty under the wide sky, and the last king's name had gone uncarved, the cities were not left to ruin and rot and open scorn. They were left to the forest. And the forest, patient beyond all our patience, the forest that had stood at the edge of every one of these cities all along, waiting the way green things always wait, simply, quietly, tenderly, began to come back in. Think of a great plaza, its white plaster cracked now and no foot to sweep it, and a single seed drifting down onto that warm pale stone, and taking root in a seam, and a slender green shoot lifting into the light where a king once walked. And then another, and another, grass in the courtyards, vines finding the carved faces of the stelae and softening them, curtain by green curtain, roots of the great ceiba and the strangler fig reaching down over the steps of the pyramids, wrapping the temples the way a mother wraps a sleeping child, the way in that other desert story the golden sand came drifting warm and dry over the tombs and hid the dead kings and kept them safe 1,000 years. Here it was not sand but green, not dry stillness, but living, breathing, growing quiet. The jungle folding its long arms around the abandoned cities and drawing them close and hiding them from all the centuries to come. Rest on that a while. The temples did not fall, they were embraced. The pyramids that had climbed so proudly above the canopy were slowly, lovingly, taken back beneath it, until a traveller could stand at the foot of a mountain of worked stone raised by 10,000 hands, and see only a green hill arise in the forest, a shape softened past, knowing under 1,000 years of leaves. And in those hidden plazas, where kings had once been carried on litters and priests had watched the wheeling stars, now the only court that gathered was the court of the forest itself, the deer stepping soft across the buried steps, the bright macaws going over in pairs, and in the mornings and the long green evenings the howler monkeys, high in the ceiba trees, lifting that strange deep rolling call that fills the whole jungle, a sound like distant thunder, like the world breathing, rolling out over the ruined temples and the roots and the silent stone. Hold that picture as you drift. A great temple disappearing gently under the canopy, the light coming down green and dim and dappled through the leaves, the howler monkeys calling far off across the plaza where no human voice has spoken in 100 years, and everything safe, everything kept, everything waiting in the quiet, unhurried, unharmed, held, that is a gentle thing to carry into the night. But do not let the story close there, in the green southern silence, because if you closed the book there you would believe, as so much of the world wrongly believes, that this was the end of the Maya, and it was not the end. It was only the evening of one country of the Maya world, and while the south went quiet under its wrapping of leaves, far to the north, up in the flat dry scrubland of the Yucatán, the land where the water hides deepest in those great round sinkholes, the cenotes, another light was rising, another city was climbing toward its own noon. For the Maya were never only the southern jungle, and in the north, as the old heartland dimmed, there rose a city whose name has never been forgotten, whose stones still stand bright and bare under the open sky where no forest ever quite claimed them back, a city that gathered the wandering threads of a changing age and wove them into something new and strange and magnificent, and its name is Chichen Itza. Let us walk toward it slowly, the way we have walked toward the other wonders of this night, and when we reach its heart, let us pause and stand before it, and give it all our unhurried attention. Chichen Itza rose in the flat northern country where there are no rivers and no hills, only the endless low forest and the great open eyes of the cenotes, and its very name means, in the old tongue, the mouth of the well of the Itz, for it was built around water, around two of those deep sacred sinkholes that gave it life and gave it holiness both. And it grew in the late centuries of the Maya story into something grander and busier than a single jungle kingdom. A great crossroads city where the old Maya ways mingled with new ideas carried down from central Mexico far to the west, from the peoples of that highland world, so that in Chichen Itza you find the Maya glyphs and the Maya gods standing beside new images, new columns, new warriors carved in stone, and above all a new and radiant god, or rather an old god given a new and shining shape, Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, the great plumed snake who was wind and water and wisdom. The same being the highland peoples called by another name, come now to glide through the Maya heaven, and at the very centre of this city, at the heart of its great open plaza, the people raised the wonder I want you to stand before now, the thing that draws travellers by the thousand even in our own late day, the temple they call El Castillo, the castle, though it was never a castle, but a temple, the pyramid of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. Stand before it in your mind. It is not like the steep sky-piercing temple mountains of Tikal that we climbed earlier in the night. It is broad and four-sided and beautifully ordered, a great stepped pyramid of pale stone rising in clean terraces to a square temple at its crown, with a wide stone stairway climbing each of its four faces. And it is calm to look upon, balanced, almost gentle in its proportions, and it holds a secret that tells you everything about these people and the thing they loved best of all, which was, you remember, time. The counting of the days, the turning of the great calendar that was the very tide of their world. For this pyramid is a calendar. It is the calendar built in stone, built so that a person could walk around it and read the year with their feet and their eyes. Each of its four stairways has 91 steps, and if you add them together, all four, that is 364, and then you add the single broad step of the temple platform at the very top, the last one, and you have 365. The days of the year, the whole solar year raised up in stone stairs beneath your climbing feet, and the 9 great terraces of the pyramid are each divided by a stairway into 2, making 18, the 18 months of the Maya year. And the terraces are patterned into 52 panels, and 52, you may remember from the deep part of our night, is the great bundle of years. The round of a human lifetime, when the 2 calendar wheels come back at last into alignment. The whole mountain is time made solid, the year and the lifetime and the sacred count all folded into one climbable, countable, standing thing, so that the pyramid does not merely honour the calendar, it is the calendar, patient and enormous, and exact under the wide northern sky. And now let me tell you the most beautiful thing about it, the thing that will draw you gently towards sleep, because it joins the 2 loves of this whole story, the love of time and the reverence for the feathered serpent, into a single moment of pure wonder that the builders set into the stone 1,000 years ago, and that still happens, faithfully to this very day. The great northern stairway of the pyramid is built along its edge with a long stepped ridge of stone, and at the very foot of it, where the stair meets the ground, the builders carved a great serpent's head, mouth open, resting on the earth. For most of the year it is only a stair with a snake's head at the bottom, waiting, but twice in the year. On the 2 days when the light is perfectly balanced, the 2 equinoxes when day and night stand equal, when spring tips into summer and again when summer tips toward the dark. On those 2 afternoons, as the sun sinks in the west, its slanting light falls across the terraces of the pyramid, and the sharp corners of those 9 great terraces throw their shadows onto the side of the northern stairway, and one shadow above another, they line up into a long rippling band of light and dark. A curving, undulating shape that lies right along the stone ridge of the stair and seems to move, seems to writhe and glide as the sun goes down, a serpent of pure shadow flowing slowly down the great stairway from the temple at the top, sliding, curving, descending, until at the very foot of the stair the last of the light touches the carved serpent's head, waiting there in the grass, and the shadow body meets the stone head, and for one long moment the whole feathered serpent, Kukulkan himself, made all of sunlight and shadow, lies complete along the pyramid, come down out of heaven to touch the earth. Picture it, the great pale pyramid glowing gold in the late sun, the crowd hushed in the plaza, and the serpent of light descending, silent, unhurried, exactly as it descended 1,000 years ago for the people who built it, exactly as it will descend 1,000 years from now, the God coming gently down the stair of days to meet the earth, twice a year forever. A wonder of light and time that no ruin and no forest and no passing of empires has ever been able to touch. Rest on that. And that was not the only marvel of the city. To the north of the Great Pyramid ran a long white causeway, a sacred road, and at the end of it opened one of the great cenotes, a vast round sinkhole with sheer walls dropping far down to still dark water. A doorway, the Maya believed, into the watery underworld, into the realm of the rain gods, and into that sacred well, in times of need and in the great turnings of the year. The people cast their most precious offerings, worked jade, gold from far away, copal incense sending up its sweet smoke, treasures given down to the still green water to cool the rain, to honour the powers below, and the well kept them, all of it, held safe in its cold dark, keeping the way the forest held the southern temples. And near the pyramid stood a round tower with a spiral stair and narrow windows in its dome, and this the Maya raised as an observatory, so that the astronomer priests could climb it and sight along those windows to the setting places of Venus, the bright wandering star they watched with such devotion, and to the moon and the turning sun, reading the heavens as their fathers had read them in the south, keeping the great calendar true. And beside all this, the people of Chichen Itza laid out the largest ball court in all the Maya world, a vast open field of stone with high walls to either side, so long that a voice at one end carries strangely down to the other, where they played that ancient game with the heavy rolling rubber ball that we walked past together in the marketplace of an ordinary day, the game that was part sport and part prayer, part joy and part sacred rite, played here on the grandest stage the Maya ever built. So you see, the north did not merely survive the fading of the south, for a long bright while the north blazed, and Chichen Itza gathered to itself the trade and the pilgrims and the wonder of a whole late age, the mouth of the well of the Itza drinking in the greatness of a changing world. And then Chichen too, in its turn, as all cities do in this gentle story, began to lower its light, the way the afternoon we spoke of eases at last toward evening, and its great days passed, and its causeways grew still. But even then the story did not end, because that is the thing to understand about the Maya, the thing that makes theirs a different tale from the desert one. There was always another town, another lord, another turning of the count. As Chichen settled into quiet, there rose not far away another northern city. Mayapan, smaller, more crowded, ringed about with a great stone wall. And for a while the lords of Mayapan held a kind of loose sway over much of the northern land, a last gathering of many towns under one roof, a last echo of the old great cities. And when Mayapan in its turn came apart, as it did, the north did not fall into empty silence, but instead broke, gently into a scattering of small proud lordships, a patchwork of little kingdoms and towns and lineages, each with its own lord and its own patch of the flat forest, quarrelling and trading and marrying and going on. None of them great in the way Tikal had been great, but all of them Maya, all of them planting the sacred maize, all of them keeping the gods and the day count, and the old ways their grandmothers had kept, and down in the deep south, in the folds of the Petan jungle where the great cities had gone quiet so long before, and up in the cool green highlands where the mountain Maya had lived all along, there too the lords endured, town by town, valley by valley, the Kishi and the Kachikal, and the many peoples of the high country building their own kingdoms among the pines, keeping their own books, counting their own katuns. So let go of the word collapse entirely now if you can, as you lie here in the dark, and let this softer truth settle over you instead. The great southern cities grew quiet, and the forest gathered them in, yes, but the Maya themselves went on. And on, and on. Generation followed generation. Children were born who never saw a stella raised and grew old and had grandchildren of their own. And all through those long centuries the milpas were burned and planted and harvested in their season. The corn came up green out of the same warm earth, the tortillas were patted out at the same stone hearths, the market stalls filled with cacao and cotton and salt. The ball rolled heavy down the stone court, the offerings went down into the still water of the cenotes, and above it all, over the quiet south and the busy north and the enduring highlands alike, the great calendar turned. And turned and turned, the days counting themselves off exactly as they always had, one cycle ending only to begin the next, nothing ever truly finishing. The count that the world would one day mistake for a prophecy of endings, simply rolling gently onward as it had always meant to, dawn after dawn after dawn. The cities of the Golden Age slept under their green blankets, safe and hidden, and the living Maya walked on beneath the same sun and the same stars their ancestors had watched. And for all the long evening of their world they did what these people had always most hoped to do, what we here in the dark still hope to do. They lived their days as kindly as they could. They fed their children, they kept their dead in memory, and they woke, each morning, in a good place. And so the count went on, unbroken, into the last age of the free Maya, the age when strange ships would at last appear upon the sea, and new voices would come speaking across the water, and the long twilight would begin. But that is the softest and the strangest turning of all, and it can wait, as everything in this story can wait, for you to come to it rested and unhurried, whether that is a little further into this same quiet night, or another night entirely. Whenever you next lie down and let the jungle close its green arms around you again. And so, generation upon generation, the calendar kept turning, the maize kept greening in the milpa, the rains kept coming and going as they always had, and the Maya kept on being the Maya, long after the world would later say they had ended, until at last, from across the great water to the east, there came something the long count had never quite reckoned on, small at first and easy to miss, only a few strange shapes far out on the sea. Picture it gently as you can, for nothing here will startle you. The fishermen of the Yucatan coast, out at dawn on the flat green water beneath a sky already warming, and on the horizon a shape that was not a cloud and was not an island, a thing with wings of cloth, moving slowly toward the land. These were the first of the ships, and the men aboard them had come a very long way, though the Maya did not yet know how far, and could not have guessed what the coming would mean. The strangers landed, and were driven off, and came again, and were driven off again, for the Maya coast did not welcome them softly. This was not a single kingdom to be toppled by taking a single crown. Far to the west and north, other great peoples fell quickly to these newcomers, you may have heard on some other night, of the golden cities of the highlands of Mexico, of the great lake city that fell in a matter of years. But the Maya were something else, something more scattered and more stubborn, and this, in the end, was their long shelter. Remember what they had always been, not one empire under one lord, but many small proud kingdoms strung out through jungle and hill and lake shore, each with its own line of rulers, its own gods, its own patch of the endless green. There was no single throne to seize, no single city that, taken, would hand you all the rest. To conquer the Maya, the newcomers would have had to conquer each little kingdom on its own, one river valley and one jungle island at a time, and the jungle itself fought against them, thick and hot and trackless, full of fever and rain and distances that swallowed armies whole. And so it took not years but lifetimes, generation after generation of pushing in, and being turned back, and pushing in again, and all the while the Maya went on planting their corn and counting their days. Let that settle over you, softly, the way mist settles over the low places at evening, that these people, so often spoken of as vanished, held their ground longer than almost anyone. Somewhere deep in the heart of the Petén rainforest, on a small island in the middle of a still and shining lake, there stood a Maya city that the strangers could not reach. Its name was Tayasal, or Nojpetén, and it was ringed by water and by miles of green, and there the old lords kept the old ways, the temples and the calendar, and the household gods, while far away, over the long slow turning of years, kingdom after kingdom beyond them slipped under foreign rule. That little island city held on, free and Maya and whole, for the better part of 200 years after the first ships came. Think of that. 2 whole centuries of dawns, of corn planted and harvested, of children born and grown and grey, while the world elsewhere changed utterly. One of the very last free Maya cities in all the world. A small green flame that would not go out until long after almost everyone assumed the story was over. You need not hold the exact year. Let the number go. Only hold the shape of it. A people who did not fall all at once, but let go slowly, a hand at a time, over lifetimes, and kept one last city on one last lake burning quietly in the dark long after the rest had gone still. Now there are sorrows in this part of the story, as there are sorrows in every long life. And we will not turn away from them, but we will not linger in them either, for that is not why we came here tonight. 2 of them we will name softly and then set down. The first was the sickness. When the strangers came, they brought with them, without meaning to and without even knowing it, illnesses the Maya had never met before, and against which their bodies had built no shelter, and these swept through the towns and villages like a hard wind through dry maize, taking the old and the young, the farmer and the priest and the lord. So that in some places more were lost to fever than were ever lost to any fighting. It was a great grief, and it was a quiet one, and there is no gentle way to hold it except to say that it happened to nearly every people the ships reached, and that the Maya endured it as they endured so much, and did not, even so, disappear. Let that pass now, like a cloud crossing the moon and moving on. The second sorrow is one that will ache in a particular way for anyone who loves the keeping of knowledge, and it is this: the books. You remember the books from the nights before, the beautiful folding books of bark paper, coated white and painted in bright glyphs, the little carved faces and creatures marching down the pages, holding the counts of the days and the movements of the wandering stars, and the histories of the gods, and the deeds of kings. There had once been a great many of them, whole libraries of them, the gathered wisdom of centuries. And one day a well-meaning and iron-hearted friar, believing he was saving souls and destroying the writings of a false faith, gathered up all the books he could find in one town and burned them in a single great fire. Others were lost in other fires, and to damp and rot and simple time, until, of all the countless books the Maya had ever made, only a small handful survived into our own day. You could hold what is left in your 2 arms. And with those books, so much of the living knowledge of the glyphs seemed to fall silent. The way, you may recall, the old picture writing of the Nile fell silent when the last person who could read it died, its birds and reeds and eyes gone quiet on the temple walls for a very long age. Here too the carved stones went dumb, standing in the jungle with their kings' names still cut deep into them, and no one left who could speak those names aloud. Rest a moment in that quiet, but do not grieve too long, for the story does not end in silence. This is the turn now, the place where the night warms again, so breathe out, slowly, once, and let it come. Because here is the thing that makes the Maya unlike so many of the world's lost worlds. The thing that is truly a comfort, and it is the plainest, gentlest fact of all: the Maya did not vanish. They never vanished. That word, lost, that the world likes to hang upon them, is not really true and never was. When people speak of a lost civilization, they often mean one that is gone entirely, its language dead, its children scattered into other peoples, its blood so mingled and its ways so forgotten that nothing of it walks the earth any more. But go today into the highlands of Guatemala, into the hills and villages of the Yucatan, into the towns of Belize and Honduras and southern Mexico, and you will find them there. Millions of Maya people, alive and well and going about their days, more people than lived in all the great classic cities at their height. They speak the Mayan languages still. Not one, but many. A whole family of living tongues descended from the speech of Pakal and the lords of Tikal, spoken at market and at supper, and in lullabies over sleeping children this very night. They plant the same sacred maize in the same kind of milpa their ancestors cleared, burning the patch and setting the corn and the beans and the squash together, as it has been done for thousands of years. In some highland places the old day count still turns, the sacred round of the calendar kept alive by daykeepers who know the names of the days and greet each one as it comes, so that the ancient wheel the classic priest set spinning has, in truth, never once stopped. The same rains fall on them, the same jaguars and howler monkeys move through the forests at the edges of their fields. The same white stone of their grandfathers' grandfathers stands in the green nearby. Of all the world's so-called vanished peoples, the Maya are the most alive, not a memory, not a ruin only, but a living people who simply, quietly, went on. Hold that close as you drift, for it is a warm thing to carry. The ones we thought were gone were here the whole time, planting corn, raising children, watching the same stars, and the silenced knowledge too that came back, in its own patient way, over the last stretch of years. First came the wanderers and the wanderers, men who had heard rumours of great cities swallowed by the jungle and who hacked their way in through the vines and the heat to find them, to climb a green hill and feel stone beneath the roots and understand, slowly, that the hill was a pyramid, to stand in a plaza gone entirely to forest and see the carved faces of kings staring out from under 1,000 years of moss. They drew what they found, and they wrote of it, and the world remembered that these cities were there. And then came the far quieter heroes, the scholars, the patient ones, bent over photographs and drawings and the few surviving books for lifetime after lifetime, puzzling at the little glyphs, guessing and failing and guessing again, slowly learning that the signs were partly pictures and partly sounds, slowly matching a carved face here to a spoken word there, until, over the last long stretch of years, piece by piece, the code came apart in their hands and the writing began to speak again. And what it said, when at last it spoke, was history, real history, names and dates and deeds, so that the stelae standing mute in the jungle for 1,000 years suddenly had voices and told us who had raised them and why, and the dead kings, who had wanted above all else to be remembered, were remembered at last. Their names read aloud once more into the warm air: Pakal of Palenque, the long-lived lord in his hidden tomb, the proud rival houses of Tikal and Calakmul, the carvers of Koppen. The very thing they had built their tall stones to do, to carry a name unbroken across the centuries, came true, only far later than they can have dreamed, and by stranger hands, but true all the same. Rest on that a while, for it is one of the kindest things this whole long story has to give, that the wish to be remembered, carved so carefully into stone, was in the end granted. And now there is one last old story to set gently right before we let the night close, because you have surely heard it, and it is not true, and its untruth is a comfort. Some years ago the world grew briefly frightened by a rumour that the Maya, with all their deep knowledge of time, had predicted the end of the world, that their great calendar simply stopped on a certain day, and that when that day came, everything would come to an end. But you know the calendar better than that now, for you have walked with it these many nights. Remember what the long count truly is, a vast counting of days heaped into cycles, heaped into greater cycles. And remember, above all, how the Maya thought of time, not as a line that runs out, not as a candle that burns down and gutters, but as a wheel, as many wheels, turning and turning, where every cycle that ends is only a cycle beginning, where the close of one great age is the dawn of the next. When that famous day arrived, what happened in the Maya way of counting was simply this: one very large cycle rolled over to its end, and the next very large cycle began, the way the reading on a great odometer clicks past all its nines and comes round again, the way a bundle of years fills up and a fresh bundle opens, the way the dry season ends and the rains return. It was never an ending, it was a turning, the oldest and calmest thing their whole world was built upon, A day ended and a new day dawned, exactly as days always have. The Maya did not fear that day. They would have welcomed it, as they welcomed every completion, with the quiet gladness of people who knew that nothing truly finishes, that all things come round again. Let that be the keynote you carry down into sleep, not an end, but a turning, not a stopping, but a dawn. And think, as you drift, of all they turned over into our keeping, the way the Egyptians left us their river wisdom and their stone. The Maya left the world their calendar, that patient and astonishing machine of interlocking days, more exact in its reckoning of the year than the calendars of most of the world for most of history. They left their mathematics, and at the very heart of it one of the most quietly profound ideas any people ever discovered. The idea of zero, a sign for nothing at all, for the empty place, without which great counting cannot be done. An idea so subtle that many brilliant peoples never found it, and the Maya carried it as a simple shell-shaped glyph in their books, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. They left their reading of the sky, their tracking of Venus and the moon, their eclipses foretold. They left their beauty, the jade and the painted stucco, the roof-combed pyramids climbing above the green, the carved faces gazing out of the stone, and most of all, more than any monument, they left themselves, the living Maya, in their millions, still here, still speaking, still planting, the truest legacy any civilization can leave, which is not ruins, but grandchildren. So let us come back now, back to where we began, all the way back through the long turning of the story to the rainforest at night. To this night, the one wrapped around you now. The jungle is doing what it has always done in the dark, exactly what it did when the first villagers slept, and when the great cities woke, and when the great cities went quiet again. The tree frogs are calling in their small bright voices. The insects keep up their endless soft roar. Somewhere far off a night bird cries once and falls still. And the warm air lies heavy and green over everything, thick with the smell of wet leaves and earth. The great pyramids stand out there in the dark under the stars, some of them still cloaked in forest, and some of them cleared again into the moonlight, silent either way, patient either way, keeping their long watch as they have kept it for 1,000 years and 1,000 more. And as you sink towards sleep, let the story pass over you once more, only as a gentle litany of nights, each one a night that was. The night the first corn was pushed into the burned dark soil of the very first milpa, and a family lay down not knowing they had begun a world. The night, ages later, that the last great capstone was hauled up the side of a towering pyramid and set into place, and a whole city looked up at what its hands had raised against the stars. The night the long-lived King Pakal was sealed at last into his hidden tomb deep in the heart of his temple, his jade mask over his quiet face, the stairway filled in behind him to wait 1,000 years in the dark. The night, somewhere in the southern jungle, that the last stela was carved and its final date cut, and the plaza before it fell slowly and forever quiet, and the forest leaned in. The night the low sun first threw its rippling shadow serpent down the great northern stair, and the gathered people gasped as light and stone and time all met at once. And the night, far away on a small island in a still lake, that the very last free Maya city finally slept, and the old calendar it kept turned over, as it always had, toward another dawn. Good night, then, from all of it. Good night from the green jungle and the white stone rising out of it. Good night from the pyramids standing silent under the stars, and the roof combs black against the Milky Way. Good night from the sacred still water of the cenote, deep and dark and open to the sky. Good night from the maize greening in the milpa, and the household hearth, and the small clay gods on the family shrine. Good night from the vast calendar quietly turning, cycle within cycle, ending only to begin. You may let go now, all the way. There is nothing left to hold. If your eyes have already closed, they closed at the right time, and nothing was missed that will not keep for another night. Let the day you carried in with you set itself fully down, and let sleep come and cover you the way the forest covered the cities, softly, completely, keeping you safe in the green quiet. Sleep is the oldest and gentlest kingdom there is, older than the mire and older than the corn, and it is the one kingdom that never falls, that receives everyone the same, king and farmer and child alike, and asks nothing of you but to lie down and be held. And there are other lost worlds still waiting, other far countries and long-gone peoples to wander through slowly on other nights, whenever you wish to come back. But not now. Now there is only this, the certainty, quiet and sure, that morning will come, as morning always comes, that beyond this warm dark the dawn is already on its way, breaking green and misty over the endless rainforest canopy, the mist rising in slow white ribbons off the ruined plazas and the sleeping fields, the howler monkeys stirring in the high branches, and, above the trees, one grey stone temple catching the very first gold light of the sun and holding it, quietly, as it has held every dawn for 1,000 years. Morning is coming. It always comes. Sleep now, and let it.